So I think if you have a strictly scientific view of the world, which I believe that I do, even though I consider myself a spiritual person, then you can't have any miracles performed, not even as few as possible, but zero, because even a single miracle would violate science. And by miracle, I mean an event that cannot be explained even in principle from the laws of science, either the laws that we know now or the laws that we will discover in the future.
What's up, everybody? From Nautilus, I'm Brian Gallagher, and you're watching Behind the Scenes. Today I'm speaking with Alan Lightman. Alan is an acclaimed astrophysicist, author, and essayist, and currently a professor of the practice of the humanities at MIT. He's written 8 novels, including Einstein's Dreams, an international bestseller that's been translated into 30 languages and adapted many times into plays and musicals. And along with a number of collections of essays and fables, he's also penned around a dozen nonfiction books, which include In Praise of Wasting Time and, most recently, The Transcendent Brain, Spirituality in the Age of Science. His recent story in Nautilus, adapted from his new book, was The Spiritual Materialist, How Transcendent Feelings Arise from the Forces of Darwinian Natural Selection. Alan, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
To start off, could you summarize your intellectual and academic background a bit and say what sort of interests and concerns are drawing your creative focus now?
Well, I grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, and from an early age, I had an interest in both the sciences, and the arts. I had a homemade laboratory, built rockets. I mixed my own rocket fuel. And I also wrote poetry and short stories as a child. And when I was in college, I took a lot of courses in both the humanities and the sciences. Um, got a PhD in theoretical physics and was a practicing physicist for at least 20 years. But I continued to write all along the way. And in recent years, I've been very interested in the human dimensions of science, the intersection between science and philosophy, ethics, theology. So that's an encapsulation of my interest.
Yeah, very wide ranging. Could you say what drew you to physics in particular? Was there a moment early in childhood that really captivated you and sent you on that trajectory?
Well, I think as a child, I was interested in all of the sciences. Uh, I was interested in biology and had uh, living organisms in my house, besides my brothers. I also had a chemistry set, but I at an early age, I developed an interest in philosophy, and I even now I consider myself an amateur philosopher. Took a lot of philosophy courses in college, and I felt that physics is the science that's closest to philosophy. It asks the most fundamental questions, and that's why physics has appealed to me more than the other sciences. But I'm interested in all of the sciences.
Was physics your way into kind of bolstering your confidence in materialism as a philosophy of sort of what's out there and what we can say really exists?
Well, I think I developed my view as a materialist, which I define not as someone who's in love with nice clothes and cars, but someone who believes that the world is made out of atoms and molecules and nothing more. Um, I developed that viewpoint from a very early age when I uh, made pendulums, and I made pendulums by attaching a fishing weight as a bob at the end of a string. And I had read in Popular Science or some other magazine that the time for a pendulum to complete a complete swing back and forth, called a period, is proportional to the square root of the length of the pendulum. So that means if you quadruple the length of the pendulum, the period doubles. Uh, and So I thought I would test out that law. And so I made pendulums of various lengths, and I measured their lengths with a ruler and timed their periods with a stopwatch. And I found, lo and behold, that the law was true. And I could even predict the periods of pendulums before I built them. And the law worked every time without exception. And that led me to the worldview that the world is an orderly place, that it's logical, that it's quantitative, and that there are no ethereal or supernatural forces governing the behavior of things. So I developed that kind of view of the world from an early age, from the experiments that I did myself, not because I read them in a book or because Galileo said so. I confirmed that myself.
Mm. All right. So once again, your new story in Nautilus is The Spiritual Materialist. Could you give us a brief summary of your story for our viewers who haven't read it yet?
Well, I call myself a spiritual materialist, and the material part I've just explained. The world is made of atoms and molecules. The spiritual part is I have a bunch of experiences that I call spirituality. It's a non-theist view of spirituality, doesn't necessarily involve God. And those experiences include feeling part of something larger than yourself, feeling a connection to nature, feeling a connection to the stars, the appreciation of beauty, the experience of wonder and awe. And all of those experiences I group together under the heading of spirituality. And I think that that all of us have had experiences like that. And I, because I'm both a materialist and what I consider to be a spiritual person in the sense I just described, that's what I mean by the term spiritual materialism.
What inspired you or gave you an impetus to start writing The Transcendent Brain? Had these ideas been trickling in your own brain for a long time, or are you grappling with maybe a tension between materialism and your spiritual experiences, or?
Well, I've been writing about this kind of intersection of science and spirituality for a long time over the course of several books. My first book on the subject was The Accidental Universe. Then that was written about 8 or 10 years ago. Then I had a book called Searching for Stars on an Island in Maine. About 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I published a book called Probable Impossibilities. And all of these books talked about the human experiences that we have, including spirituality, but within a scientific context. And I thought after those first three books that it was time to codify this notion that I was talking about and give it a name. And the name I give it was spiritual materialism. But beyond that codification, I wanted to show that all of these experiences that I mentioned, that I associate with spirituality, that they actually can be explained in terms of Darwinian evolution. That all of these experiences, like feeling connected to things larger than ourselves, an appreciation of beauty that back in our evolutionary history, hundreds of thousands of years ago, that these a tendency to a capacity for these experiences actually had survival benefit in the Darwinian sense. And so part of the new book is showing and arguing the evolutionary benefit, the survival benefit of these different forms of spirituality. So not only is this non-theist view of spirituality consistent with science, but it actually can be explained by science.
So let's get into that a little bit more. How can the same spiritual feelings that religious believers say they experience through their connection to God arise completely from evolutionary forces alone?
Well, let's just take our feeling and connection to things larger than ourselves. We'll start with that one. Couple of million years ago, when we lived in caves, and we know from archaeological evidence that usually about 20 people lived in a cave together, a community of 20 people. You were very much dependent on the other people in the cave. You had some people who went out, the hunters and gatherers who got the food. You had other people who stayed back in the cave and kept the fire going. You had some people who took care of the children. And it was a very closely knit, interdependent community. And if you got separated from the group, if you were out on your own for some reason, it was a quick death. And so I think that this need for cooperation, for being part of a larger group, was built into our DNA at an early stage. I'll mention one more experience that I associate with spirituality, and that is the appreciation of beauty. And both Darwin and Freud have said that our appreciation of beauty is a byproduct of our sexual lives, our need to reproduce. When you reproduce, you're looking for a mate, and you're looking for a healthy mate, which has the best chance of successful mating. And a healthy mate is someone who is strong, who has good color, good facial features, all of those characteristics and more. And a byproduct of that is the appreciation of beauty in general. As I said, both Darwin and Freud believe that our appreciation of beauty, our sense of beauty, originated with reproductive needs. So those are just two examples of how traits that we have that I associate with spirituality had survival benefit in our early evolutionary history. I think that all of the experiences that I mentioned that I associate with spirituality are also shared by people who associate those experiences with a divine, omniscient being that created the universe. And I totally respect that belief. I don't share it myself, but I respect it completely. And what I would argue is that you can also explain these experiences purely from a non-theist point of view. And that's what I do in the book.
What exactly do you mean when you say that you respect it, when you don't believe it yourself, or you think that a better explanation is available? Um,
Well, when I say a better, I'm not saying it's a better explanation. I'm saying it's the explanation that I have. When I say I respect the belief, these other beliefs. There are a lot of things that I respect that are not part of me. I respect people with blonde hair and blue eyes. Um, uh, More than 50% of the world population believes in an omniscient, purposeful being that created the universe. More than 50% of the world population believes in an afterlife. And among those believers, there are many very, very smart, very creative people. And I accept that. Uh, I honor those people and I honor those beliefs. Uh, but just because I accept them and honor them, I accept those people, doesn't mean that I have to believe those particular things myself. I mean, all of us form our own view of the world. Uh, all of us have our own principles and beliefs, and I respect other people's beliefs, some of which I share and some of which I don't. So, on the spectrum of atheism at one side and complete belief on the other, I'm somewhere in between an agnostic and an atheist. I
Oh,
don't call myself an atheist. I'm not a believer either. I'm closer to the atheism end of the spectrum uh, than the middle. Uh, Einstein was once asked whether he was an atheist, and his response
mhm.
was, I don't think that our human minds are big enough to contemplate this question of whether a God exists or not. And then he went further to say that he believes that we, being human beings, are like children who have gone into a large library, and we see a lot of books written in that library on the shelves, written in various languages. And we don't understand all of those languages, but we think that somehow they got there. Uh, so that's his sort of agnostic view, and I feel that I can't do better than Einstein in my views. Um, the reason why I'm not an atheist is because uh, I don't like absolutes of any kind,
Mm.
and an atheist says that they are absolutely sure that this omniscient being doesn't exist. Uh, I'm not sure of anything. My experience with the world, starting with the pendulums that I built when I was 12 years old, had led me to the most probable view of the world, and that's where I am.
So, I mean, would you say materialism is not an kind of absolutist position about what exists out there?
Well, that's a good point. Um, I think I'll say that everything that I have seen and experienced, both as a regular person as a scientist, leads me to the view that most probably there is no supernatural or ethereal substance out there. That I believe that the most probable interpretation of everything that I've experienced, everything that I've read, is that the world is made only of material things. So I think that's the best statement that I can give of myself as a materialist.
Do you follow Einstein in taking a kind of view like Spinoza did? I understand he was a big fan of Spinoza and kind of
Yeah.
equating God and nature and having a completely deterministic view of things.
Well, Spinoza said that God is, if God exists, God is not a personal God, and I certainly believe that. And the view that God and nature are equivalent is I think called pantheism. And I if you define nature as God, or if you say that there's an equation between the two, then I'm perfectly comfortable with that. Um, but if you go further than that and say that there is this being that exists outside of time and space, which is what most religious traditions believe about God. There's this being that exists outside of time and space and can, from time to time, intervene in the physical world and perform uh, events, cause events to happen that don't follow any of the laws of nature, either that we know now or that we will ever know in the future, then that view is incompatible with science.
One of the believers you mentioned near the beginning of your book is Moses Mendelssohn, and I like
Right.
the quote you include from him where he says that God commits as few miracles as possible.
Right. I
So,
love that quote.
what do you find interesting or compelling about Moses
Well,
Mendelssohn?
I
That is.
love that quote because it's the quote from a person who wants to believe in the scientific worldview, wants to believe that nature is orderly and obeys rules and laws, but also is very spiritual and believes in the soul, believes in an afterlife. And I think that in that statement he's struggling with both of those viewpoints. Um, I think if you have a strictly scientific view of the world, which I believe that I do, even though I consider myself a spiritual person, then you can't have any miracles performed, not even as few as possible, but zero, because even a single miracle would violate science. And by miracle, I mean an event that cannot be explained, even in principle, from the laws of science, either the laws that we know now or the laws that we will discover in the future. If you take a smartphone, if you could go back 100 years and show a smartphone to people living 100 years ago, they would consider that to be miraculous because there would be nothing in their understanding or their science that could explain it. And that's why I say, as part of my definition of a miracle, that it's an event that we can't explain now and could not explain even in the infinite future. So it's a miracle that comes outside of time and space. Um, it's something that happens. Now there are some scientists who are believers. Uh, there's a nuclear physicist at MIT named Ian Hutchinson, and I'm just using him as one example. And he's a well-regarded physicist, but he also uh, believes in the resurrection of Christ, for example, which would be a miracle. And his view, the way that he reconciles these two seemingly incompatible things, is he says that that nature obeys laws most of the time. Nature is logical and rational most of the time, but occasionally God can intervene and perform a miracle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an interesting viewpoint. It's not one that I share, but it's an interesting viewpoint. Again, like Moses Mendelssohn, it's the attempt of a person who is committed to both science and committed to a belief in God.
That's right.
Um,
And
and of course,
one of
most
the
of the time,
aspects.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. Continue your thought.
Well, I was just saying when I use the word God, of course, we have to define what we mean, and by what I mean by the word God is a being that exists outside of time and space, and an omniscient being that created the universe purposefully. Not
Mhm.
an accident, because if it's an accident, you could say it was a quantum fluctuation and explain it completely by physics. So that's what I mean when I use the word God, and I think that's compatible with most religious traditions in their definition of God.
One of the aspects of spirituality you mentioned is what you call the creative transcendent. Could you give us an example from your own life and work that explains what that is?
Well, I think all of us have had creative moments, and it's a marvelous, mysterious sensation. Uh, the creative By creative transcendent, I mean a moment of creativity where you discover or experience something that's truly new, and during the moment of creativity you lose sense of your body, you lose sense of time, you lose sense of where you are, of your ego, and you're just in the zone. uh, you're in this creative space, and I think that all of us have experienced moments like that, and it's one of the most wonderful and magnificent experiences that we can have. uh, I call it the creative transcendent, and I associate those moments also with my understanding of spirituality. Um, I've had, I mean, like many of us, I've had many moments like that, both as a writer and as a scientist. Um, I'll just give one example. As a writer, I was writing a novel, and I was on my third draft or so, and I had a character that just would not come to life. And her I just didn't understand her. She didn't seem real to me. um, Her dialogue didn't seem right. And then I think I was in the shower. I suddenly heard her say something, and it was a line that was so true that it just brought her to life. It made me understand her, and I don't know where that line came from. I'm sure it was, somewhere in my subconscious mind, and this character came to life. And from then on, I was able to rewrite her so that she was this person that I now understood, and it made the whole novel. So that's an example from my own experience of the creative transcendent.
So in those moments, you describe them as kind of you lose your sense of self, you're in the zone, and um, so what is the evolutionary kind of story that would support that kind of experience? Um,
Well,
you
that's
also mentioned
mhm.
that spirituality is a kind of spandrel. Perhaps
Yes,
that's part of the explanation.
yes, a spandrel, which is a term that I think Stephen Jay Gould used, but it might have been used by someone else before him. It's a trait that by itself does not have direct survival benefit, but it's the byproduct of a trait that has survival benefit. An example of a spandrel is the uh, ability to write poetry. That probably didn't have any direct survival benefit. I can't imagine, if a saber-toothed tiger is chasing you, that sitting down under a rock and taking a few minutes to write a poem, I can't imagine that would be very helpful. But certainly the sensitivity to sound and rhythm would have had survival benefit. And so a byproduct of that sensitivity would be the ability to write poetry. And I think so that's what a spandrel is. And I think that the creative transcendent which is related to our creative selves. I think that that is a byproduct of a well-developed brain. I mean, you can ask, where does our art come from? You know, our art doesn't have any direct survival benefit, or most of it, but it probably every art you can think of is the byproduct of a trait that has survival benefit. For example, our appreciation of beauty, which we were talking about a minute before, um, is a byproduct of successful sexual reproduction and the attraction of a healthy, suitable mate.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that our all of our art and our creativity is indirectly related to other traits that have survival benefit, and certainly high intelligence. Of course, we can see non-human animals that also have a creative instinct. We can see crows that play games, and dolphins that play, that follow boats and jump over the sterns of boats, and they're obviously playing and doing something beyond just surviving. So I think a lot of our traits had either had direct survival benefit or byproducts of traits that had survival benefit.
The painter Paul Ingebrigtsen told you that even truth is merely a vehicle for beauty. Do you think that's true of science? Or would you rather say, as a physicist, that beauty is a vehicle for truth? How do you think about that?
I would say just the way that you said it, that it's the reverse in science. That the long history of science has shown that the seeking of beauty, especially in mathematics, has often been a guide to correct theories of nature. I'm just going to, sorry, excuse me just a second. I've got to plug in. The one example of that is the theory developed in the 1960s that showed that the electromagnetic force and one of the nuclear forces are actually manifestations of a more fundamental force called the electroweak force. And the impetus for that was seeking a simpler, more elegant, more beautiful theory. Einstein's theory of relativity, his special theory, was also motivated by an aesthetic of simplicity, that the laws of nature should appear the same no matter what our motion is. That there is no such thing as absolute motion, that an observer sitting on a train at rest in the train station and an observer in a train that's moving by would see exactly the same laws of physics. That's an aesthetic of simplicity and beauty. Beauty is not always a correct guide to truth in science. Sometimes it leads us astray, and the most beautiful theory is not the right theory. When I say right, I mean one that's agrees with experiment. But most of the time, history has shown that aesthetic considerations and appreciation of beauty can lead us to correct theories. And it's pretty amazing to me that our sense of beauty should be the same as nature's sense of beauty. I mean, why is it that beauty leads us to correct theories of nature. That's somewhat mysterious to me, and my best explanation of that is that we are part of nature. You know, we came out of nature. Uh, we're not looking at nature from the outside, we're looking at nature from the inside. And a lot of the way that our brain functions, which including our sense of aesthetics, was developed over millions of years of evolution in and through nature.
No
So
doubt, yeah.
so maybe it's not that surprising that our sense of aesthetics is the same as the sense of as the aesthetics behind the laws of nature.
What is on the horizon for you, Alan? Do you think you have another novel or another book on the way? What's occupying your time now?
Well, I'm always writing. I don't really have writer's block like some people. A lot of what I write is no good and it ends up in the wastebasket, but I don't have writer's block. Um, but I've just recently finished working on a 3-part public television series called Searching Our Quest for Meaning in the Age of Science. And that is still being shown on PBS stations around the country. It's about to
Excellent.
premiere in New York, the New York area. And there are a number of events associated with that. So I've been pretty busy with that television series. I'm the on-camera host of this series, and it's based on a couple of my books, including the one we've been talking about, The Transcendent Brain. So that's been taking up my time recently.
Well, that's fantastic. I'll look forward to checking that out. Before we close, do you want to tell our viewers where they can find you online? Are you on any social media channels? Do you have a website they can check out to follow more of your work?
I have a web page at MIT. So if you Googled me, you would be able to see a Wikipedia site and then a site at MIT. That would be probably the best places. I don't use Twitter or Instagram. Uh, I have a Facebook page that I don't check very often. Um, so those are Twitter seems to get people in trouble. So I've I've
Probably wise to
I'm kind
avoid.
of I've steered clear of it.
All right. Once again, the new book is The Transcendent Brain, available, I believe, in fine bookstores everywhere. Go check that out. And Alan, is great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Brian. Great to talk to you. Thanks for your good questions.